Danny, thank you. You're welcome. Thank you
So,
for having me.
yes. Okay. So, Mr. Baleka is an internationally recognized champion of justice, reparations, and repatriation. He has made numerous presentations to the African Union and the United Nations on human rights, New African Independence Movement, and the transgenerational epigenic effects of slavery. He is a member of the International Civil Society Working Group of the Permanent Forum of People of African Descent and serves the NCOBRA Health Commission and the NCOBRA International Affairs Commission. Wow, busy. Recently, Mr. Baleka was invited to speak at the historic New African Thought Conference hosted by Serdotola in Yaoundé, Cameroon, on October 25th through the 28th in 2022. So please help me welcome Mr. Siphiwe Baleka.
Abene, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nsumba, greetings. Abene binhamne yowule. I said thank you to the wise ones of the past, our ancestors. I spoke to you in my ancestral language of my paternal ancestors, the Balanta people, as evidence that it's possible to recover from ethnocide. I am calling today from Guinea-Bissau, which is my ancestral homeland where I live. If for some reason we lose the connection, give me about 30 or 60 seconds to come back on because we have been having a little bit of problems. The title of my presentation today is Ethnocide, Genocide's Twin Sister. And my comments today are especially focused for the Afro-descendants in the Americas. So with that, let's begin. Next slide, please. So the definition of ethnocide, if we could move the slide. Yeah, here we go. The definition of ethnocide is the deliberate and systematic destruction of the culture of an ethnic group. Ethnocide is differentiated from genocide. And one way to put it is genocide kills people, while ethnocide kills social cultures through the killing of individual souls. Next slide, please. Yes, next slide, please. So Raphael Lemkin is the man that coined the phrase genocide. But when he proposed genocide, he added a cultural component, which he called, he added a cultural component, which he called cultural genocide. We can just stay on this slide. So ethnocide means that an ethnic group is denied the right to enjoy, develop, and transmit its own culture and its own language, whether collectively or individually. This involves an extreme, okay, we went back a little bit. The point I wanted to make here was that the drafters of the Genocide Convention considered the use of the term ethnocide, but dropped it from their consideration. The legal definition of genocide is left unspecific about the exact nature, but as we've heard throughout the conference, right, it entails the intent to destroy a racial, religious, ethno group, and they have enumerated specific components of it. At the UNESCO conference in 1981 in San Jose, again, they were defining ethnocide as involving extreme forms of massive violations of human rights, and in particular the right of an ethnic groups to respect for their cultural identity. And they declared that ethnocide, that is cultural genocide, is a violation of international law equivalent to genocide. Next slide, please. Now, are you the victim of ethnocide? And again, I'm speaking especially to those people who are descendants of the Africans who were kidnapped, trafficked across the Atlantic and enslaved in North Central South America, the Caribbean, and other places, right? One, are you the descendant of a person that was captured from their homeland, trafficked across the Atlantic and enslaved in the Americas, right? What is the name of the ancestor that was captured, survived the trafficking, and was enslaved in the Americas? What language did that ancestor speak? What were the specific cultural and specific practices of that ancestor? And have you returned to your ancestral homeland? If you answered yes to the first question and you cannot answer the other three questions, you are a victim and are still suffering ethnocide. And if you are able to answer the second, third, fourth, and fifth, are recovering from ethnocide. Next slide, please. Okay, so in order to sort of make the point that we can really understand it, I want to tell the story that started around 1758 with a young boy named Brasa Inchabra, who was born in the village of Unche in Nakra, the homeland of the Binham Brasa people who today are called the Balanta. In the picture, you can see a little boy standing in front of a herd of cattle, a boy about the age of 8. This is a picture I took in 2020 when I had returned to my ancestral homeland that depicts the actual culture of the Balanta people, even today, the amount of freedom, the open space, the land, the homeland of Balanta people on the west coast of Africa in what is today called Guinea-Bissau. Right? This boy lived in what is called the Three Rivers or Southern Rivers area that encompasses the territory south of the Consamance River and the Cacheo River in Guinea-Bissau. Next slide, please. So Brasa Inchabra was captured in an ambush, and he was taken to the slave fort in Cacheo. And he was trafficked across the Atlantic and he was brought to Charleston, South Carolina. Can we have the next slide, please? Now, when he arrived in Charleston, South Carolina, right, he was subject to the following laws in South Carolina, which today are considered violations of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, as well as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. These were the state laws of South Carolina. Section 324, and go back, please. Can we go back one slide, please? Okay. Under the South Carolina Negro laws at the time, section 324 and 36, George was not allowed to leave the plant. So, okay. We need to go forward one slide. All right, I'll just kind of wait. We need to go forward one slide. There we go. Let's stay there for a minute. It's important to understand that this boy, Brasa Inchabra, was renamed George. He was not allowed to leave the plantation without permission or being accompanied by a white man. The punishment was whipping on the bare back, not exceeding 20 lashes. If George refused to submit or undergo the examination of any white person, it was lawful for any such white person to pursue, apprehend, and moderately correct George. And if he resisted, defended himself, or struck a white person, he could be lawfully killed. This is the genesis of today's modern immunity laws, right? Section 7, 23, and 43. George was not allowed to gather together with the other slaves, nor possess arms, ammunition, or stolen goods. Gathering together with more than 7 slaves was punishable by up to 20 lashes on the bare back. Section 16, if George set fire to, burned, or destroyed any sack of rice, corn, or other grain, take or carry away any slave, or maliciously poison or administer any poison to any person, the penalty was death. Section 17, any attempt at insurrection or enticing a slave to run away was punished by public execution to deter others. Section 21 of the law said George could be forced to whip or kill another slave, and if he refused, the punishment was whipping on the bare back, not exceeding 20 lashes. Section 30 and 31 said that George was not allowed to buy, sell, deal, traffic, barter, or exchange or use commerce for any goods, wares, provisions, grains, victuals, or commodities of any sort or kind whatsoever. All such goods would be seized, and the punishment was public whipping on the bare back, not exceeding 20 lashes. Section 32, alcohol was forbidden. Section 34, George was not allowed to have a boat, canoe, horse, cattle, sheep, or hogs. Section 36, George was not allowed to beat drums, blow horns, or use any other loud instruments. Section 40, George was not allowed to have or wear any sort of apparel whatsoever finer or greater in value than the Negro cloth, et cetera, et cetera. And then Section 41, George was not allowed to rent or hire any house, room, store, or plantation of his own account. And Section 45, George was not allowed to read or write. Next slide, please. These represent state-sanctioned use of terror to destroy Brasa Nchabra's culture and knowledge of his ethnic identity, while keeping him alive as a form of economic, as a shadow component of the capitalist system. So they sought to destroy his ethnic culture while keeping him alive. Next slide, please. Okay, again, we're talking about state-sanctioned ethnocide as the history of the United States. Yes, next slide, please. Now, in 1951, right, William Patterson and Paul Robeson petitioned the We Charge Genocide, the famous petition to the United Nations for release from a crime of the United States against the Negro people. The petition detailed, among other things, 152 incidents of killings of unarmed Blacks. So all the way since 1951, we have been presenting the data, proving the genocide against us, okay? This is not new. We've been doing it for 7 decades. Now, at that time, back in 1951, Eleanor Roosevelt was the head of the US delegation of the UN Human Rights Commission. And a letter was sent to select list of prominent men and women to a number of the country's leading law schools. This is William Patterson writing in his book, The Man Who Cried Genocide. He sent these letters out, and the replies came from all sides. Interestingly enough, they were in the main along the color line. A majority of the Negroes polled believed that genocide convention should be invoked, while a majority of the white liberals and personalities were of a contrary view. Without exception, faculty members at law schools were adamantly opposed to the genocide charges. Most of them were in favor of the genocide convention as an abstract statement of law, but rejected any attempt to apply it, declaring that such an attack impeached the integrity of the United States. This was the consensus view of the replies received from white liberals in general. Among those who replied was Professor Lemkin himself, the one who coined the word genocide. Patterson said that how an honest person viewing the American scene impartially could come to any conclusion other than that forms of genocide were being practiced in the United States was difficult for us to see. Professor Lemkin experienced no such difficulty. Professor Lemkin said, and he argued vehemently, that the provisions of the Genocide Convention bore no relationship to the US government or its position vis-a-vis Black citizens. Lemkin and other law professors and practicing attorneys were evidently fearful of criticizing a government in relation to its Black citizens. Next slide, please. So what we need to understand is that ethnocide is genocide, okay? It concerns policies and processes designed to destroy the separate identity of a group with or without the physical destruction of its members. Ethnocide is actually part of the definition of genocide. Today's scholarly community appears to be of two minds, i.e., that while cultural genocide, properly called ethnocide, was very much in evidence in the story of the Africans brought to the United States and enslaved, there was little to no intention of physical genocide as economic interests, especially in the American South, took precedence. Next slide, please. Okay, so the argument being made here is that since they were vital to the economic interests of the United States, they were interested in keeping them alive, which again, as we all know, the definition of genocide is the intent to destroy in whole or in part. Now, the argument that Eleanor Roosevelt made to the We Charge Genocide petition in 1951 was that the charge of genocide against the colored people in America is ridiculous in terms of the United Nations definition, and her reasons were, one, although the Negro death rate is high in America, so is the birth rate, and two, although sickness and diseases carry off more colored people than in other groups, an effort is being made to overcome this. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. So what I'm getting at is the historical analysis of using genocide as a strategy to secure justice, and how over the last 7 decades, none of us here need to be convinced that genocide is being practiced against Afro-descendant people in the United States. We can spend our energies in trying to use data to prove that, or we can wage effective campaigns to secure resources for our justice, for our internal and external reparations. So what I'm saying is that now that we've been able to do, an analysis of all the genocide campaigns that we as Afro-descendants in the United States have done in every decade since 1951, what we have concluded is that we should switch from a campaign charging genocide to a campaign charging ethnocide, because it's already recognized that ethnocide by the white liberals and international society, it's already recognized as a fact that ethnocide has been committed against us. We don't have to swim upstream and do a whole lot to make that point. There are more international forums with easier access available to individuals and small ethnic communities to make the ethnocide claim. So for example, on January 23rd of this year, I submitted, to the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights, the first ethnocide claim based on transgenerational epigenetic effects, DNA testing, and genealogy research that actually very simply and very easily shows and proves the ethnocide that was committed against Brasa and Chabra and me, my family. I am the great-great-great-great-great-grandson of Brasa and Chabra. Next slide, please. Next slide. So, making your ethnocide claim under the Geneva Convention, The 1949 Geneva Convention, Article, please go back. Yeah, the 1949 Geneva Convention, Article 4.1, defines prisoners of war, and Article 5 states that the present convention shall apply to the persons referred to in Article 4 from the time they fall into the power of the enemy and until their final release and repatriation. So I have developed a series of questions. You see the flow chart here is a series of questions that if you can answer them, right? The top track is if you happen to be the one of the Africans that was here before the slave trade, that was indigenous to the land. There's a series of questions. If you can answer them, then you can make an ethnocide claim. And then those that came here as a result of the slave trafficking across the Atlantic, there's also a series of questions. If you can answer them, a solid ethnocide claim under binding international law. Next slide, please. I'm going to show you an example from my own case of what it takes to actually make an ethnocide claim. Next slide, please. All right, making your prisoner of war an ethnocide claim. First question, name of the combat or victim. In this case, Brasa in Chabra, later renamed George. Territory where the victim was captured, the village of Unche, Nakra, Guinea-Bissau. Date when the victim was captured, 1760s. The exact date is unknown. Ethnicity of the victim. Through African ancestry DNA testing, we now have hardcore scientific proof that the ethnicity is Balanta. Age of the victim was approximately about 8 years old. Gender of the victim, male. Language of the victim, Balanta Kantohe. Was the victim captured in a declared war? The answer is yes. Who declared the war? Pope Nicholas V in the Dum Diversis Apostolic Decree or Edict of 1452. That was the declared war. Who invaded the territory of the victim? In this case, it was the Portuguese, the English, the Mandinka, the Fulo, and the Bijagos. How was the victim captured? Ambushed while going to the market with his mother. Where was the victim imprisoned? Slave fort in Cacheo, Guinea-Bissau. Was the victim relocated? Yes. Relocated where? Charleston, South Carolina. Under whose authority was the victim held as a prisoner of war? In this case, it was the state of South Carolina under the Negro Law of 1740, the state of North Carolina, Dempsey Blake, Asia Blake, and Catherine Hartsfield Blake, who were the slave owners, the United States of America, and the United States Corporation. Who committed the ethnocide? Again, state of South Carolina, Henry Lawrence, the slave auction in South Carolina, the state of North Carolina, Dempsey Blake, Asia Blake, Catherine Hartsfield Blake, the United States of America, and the United States Corporation. What is your relationship to the victim? I am the great-great-great-great-great-grandson. Where do the living descendants of the victim wish to be returned? The answer to that is our ancestral homeland in Guinea-Bissau and the 80 acres of territory in Wake County, North Carolina, that were promised to us under Sherman Special Field Order number 15, are 40 acres of a mule. And these 80 acres would become an autonomous territory in the United States for the Balanta descendants of the Baleka family to escape the jurisdiction of the United States. Next slide, please. So what I'm showing you is that because of DNA testing and genealogy research, for the first time in human history, a people that have been the victim of cultural genocide called ethnocide, for the first time, we have the tools to actually be able to recover I can actually speak the language that was taken from me, that was destroyed in the ethnocide. I did it when I opened up my presentation by speaking Balanta. I actually am living the culture now. I am living in my ancestral homeland. The white supremacists that committed the genocide and ethnocide never intended us to be able to regain this knowledge of who we are, where we come from, and be able to return. All of this is what we call the lineage restoration movement. Over almost 1 million of us have taken the African ancestry DNA test and found out our maternal and paternal lineages. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up by explaining. If you look at the bottom right of this slide, there are genealogy trees. There's a patrilineal tree and a matrilineal tree. And one of the things that the lineage restoration movement is helping people to understand is that your identity comes from genetically from your non-recombinant DNA. That is the DNA that is passed from fathers to sons to sons to sons to sons that doesn't change, right? In every generation, it is the constant thing that gives you your identity, as well as on your matrilineal side is passed down from mothers to daughters to daughters to daughters to daughters to daughters. So in this tree, over here where you see these blue triangles at the top, that's Brasa and Chabra. And the triangles below him are his sons, his grandsons, all the way down to me. Now, according to the tree, regardless of who marries into the lineage, here you have double yellow X, you have the green X's. Those represent recombinant DNA, DNA that changes, that enters into the root lineage, okay? So for example, as our previous presenter said, we have some people that did mix with indigenous people here, okay? And they got some of that DNA, but the one thing that remains constant in every generation, no matter who family, is the non-recombinant DNA. So I like to explain this by, if you look over to the left, you see this, African woman Christmas tree. You want to think of DNA, the ancestral, the paternal and the maternal ancestral non-recombinant DNA is the Christmas tree. And all of the DNA that you get from people that marry into the family, those are the decorations. And when it comes to telling the story of who you are, your identity, you don't tell the story from the viewpoint of the decoration on the tree. You tell it from the viewpoint of the tree, because it's the tree that holds all of the decorations. So therefore, when it comes to identity, again, you have to find out what is your paternal and maternal non-recombinant DNA. That will give you your identity so that you can tell the story from the beginning. Okay,
Yeah,
next slide.
Interrupting. Yes, I'm sorry for interrupting, but you have 3 minutes left.
Okay, good. I'm wrapping up. Perfect. Next slide. I believe that's really the end. I think maybe I have one more slide. Next slide, please. Essentially, the point that I want to make, that I hope people that can take away, is that it's not an argument or debate between genocide or ethnocide. We are the victims and have suffered both of them, okay? What I'm saying is that one out of many strategies, we have been trying to make the case for genocide. We have made it, we have proved it. We have the data going all the way back since W.E.B. Du Bois did it, talking about from Reconstruction. We did it since, we've been making the genocide case. We've been running campaigns. And that's one strategy, particularly a legal strategy. But now we have a new strategy. that allows even individuals to internationalize their case, bring it into these forums, and attempt to secure justice through the legal system. And I'm not saying that's the only tactic, right? It's a tactic. Me, I'm all about self-determination. I'm all about independence and autonomy. But what I'm saying is we at this point should be empowering people to use DNA, use genealogy research, because ethnocide cases are much easier to make, and there's less opposition and resistance to them. And so that is what I had wanted to contribute to this conference, to put remember, ethnocide is genocide. So it's not taking away from genocide. It's just a much smarter way at this point. There are many ways to skin a cat. This is one way, and I believe a really strategic way, and I will keep people posted and updated on my case at the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and my contact number is on the screen, and I'm sure it will be made available. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Baleka. This is really insightful. We appreciate that you really got us using even technology. So we all are now going to be thinking about DNA, how to land us, help us go home, go back home. And yes, so thank you.
If I could make one comment about something I saw in the chat. Somebody actually kind of made the comment, so what if an individual can make a claim? Let us remember that human rights are all about the dignity and the justice of individuals. Communities and nations are made up of individuals, and it's individuals that suffer the violations of human rights. So for somebody to say, it's not important for an individual to be able to make a claim, actually, that's the most important thing, because human rights pertain to individuals first, as well as collective rights. So I just want to put that out there, that we can actually have a proper perspective. We need to empower individuals as well as our collective communities. Ubuntu. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Really, everybody, let's thank again Mr. Baleka for this wonderful presentation. I so wish we had time for questions, but we don't. It's been a long day. We don't want to keep people around any much longer. So everybody, if you have questions, you want us to send it to different authors, presenters, email us to the email that's posted in the chat. All of you who are on Zoom, so just send us the questions, send us your comments. We would love to hear from you about your impressions of the conference, of course. So please stay in touch, and we will be in touch. We still have a day tomorrow for those of you who are teachers and so on. We will connect, and you've registered for the conference. We have a number of people who have registered, 23 for the workshop. So that's a great number. And so we continue tomorrow. But for the formal presentations, this is the end. I don't know if my colleagues want to say a few words, but it's been enriching from all of us. Here's Dr. Aisetu Bahima, my colleague.
Thank you so much. Really, those 2 days have been packed with so many things. And my colleagues and I were jokingly saying, we really need a good session of therapy or a group session, at least to debrief, because that is how, truth hurts, right? It really hurts, but I think it's through this hurt that we can heal, because it's a journey. And thank you for all of our amazing presenters for bringing all the truth here so that we can feel it and process it and move forward. So I really, really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Hopefully we'll see all of you next year again in our 10th annual conference. So yes, here you go.
And I just want to say thank you to not only the amazing speakers, everyone that attended our conference, GRAD, all our researchers, everyone that's here, how much we learned, that this was an amazing, filling time and day. And we look forward to actually posting your stuff so other people can get to it and understand it and study it, and hopefully continue this intellectual conversation that we've been having for 2 days. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you again for all the attendees over both days. We appreciate you. We do this for you. So again, thank you. Peace, everyone.